Welcome to Right on Track, a songwriting podcast. Thanks to Tone for tuning in. I'm Demi Michelle Schwartz, and I'm thrilled you're joining me on my songwriting journey. So kick back and relax, don't fall flat, and remember, stay right on track. Hello everyone, welcome back to Right on Track. I'm so excited because joining me today is Shantell Ogden. Hey Shantell.
Hey, how are you?
I am great, how are you?
Doing great. Thanks for having me on the show today.
Of course, I'm so excited to have you because we are going to be chatting all about the sync world. But before we get into this, can you share with everyone a little about yourself and how you got started in music?
Sure. So I've been doing music for a really long time. It feels like forever, but basically, I grew up on a family farm, and we always had music, particularly country going. And when we would ride horses, we would sing together as a family. And so I have a deep love of music and storytelling from my upbringing. Later on, I discovered I could actually write things that I couldn't talk about. So initially, songwriting for me was it was almost like a personal diary. And as I continued to write, I started performing. Back in the day, it was in a small town in the early 2000s named Dahlonega, Georgia, that I got my start as a performer. And then I decided, I really want to learn more about music as a skill. So I went to Berklee College of Music in Boston. I was there for a couple years and graduated. Then I moved to Nashville in 2005. So I love music. I can't imagine not participating in music. So I just am so grateful to be doing what I love.
I love that so much. I love how songwriting for you started with recognizing that you could write about things that you couldn't necessarily talk about because I'm definitely the same way. And I think a lot of songwriters start that way. We kind of discover this craft as something we can turn to. And then once we discover that we love it so much, it's almost like wanting to learn as much as possible about the industry as a whole to grow.
Absolutely. And as a songwriter yourself, you definitely understand that.
For sure, yeah. So I'm so excited to chat about the sync side of things, which we have not talked about on the show. I haven't had any episodes about this yet, so I'm very excited. So for anybody listening who just doesn't know what sync licensing is or any of that, can you just give a brief overview?
Sure. So sync licensing is basically it's when you license your music for film and TV. It's called sync because what is created when you license your music to film and TV is a synchronization license. And basically, it's just referring to when a filmmaker places or syncs your music up against a scene. So that's why it's called sync licensing. And that's kind of just an overview of what it is.
Perfect. So this can be huge for exposure if you get a song in a TV show or a movie. So just from that side of things, what does getting a placement do for an artist's career?
So I think it does a couple of things, and you've already identified one of the key ones, which is basically an opportunity for exposure. But it also can bring in a paycheck, which I think is, as artists, it's always good to look at ways that we can monetize our work, because when you create that sync license, there's a fee associated with it. Now, that fee is two parts. Half of the fee is for the master recording, and the other half is for the publishing and writing shares. So let's say, as an independent artist, most of us own our own masters, so we've paid for our own recordings. So let's say I recorded a song in the studio, and so I paid for that, so I own the master. I'm acting as the record label in that case. And then I wrote the song with one other writer. That means we would split the other half of the sync license. So let's say a sync license generates $1,000. 500 of that would go to the master recording owner, and 500 of that would go to the publishers and writers, which in the case of the example I used would be half and half.
That's perfect. So, what are the different kinds of situations that artists can find themselves in when getting their songs placed in these situations?
So I think I'm actually going to answer that question in two parts. The first part is really how does an artist get their music into film and TV? There's three different paths that I would just kind of let everybody know about. The first path is to build relationships yourself as an artist. So, for example, go to a local filmmakers convention or event, network with filmmakers, and start building relationships. So, when those filmmakers are working on projects, they can ask you for music. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it is to work with a library, a music library. So basically, these are essentially large catalogs where people can submit their songs for consideration. If the catalog likes the song, they will license it and it will be sitting in their catalog. So when someone needs music, like a film or a TV show needs music, they'll go to the library and they'll search on keywords to find the song. The third way you can do it is you can work with somebody like myself who has a small company called SoSync. That's SO-SYNC.com. And I work in two capacities. I work as a music supervisor for indie filmmakers, which means I work with them on the song needs they have, on finding those songs for them, and sourcing songs for various scenes. And I also work as a sync agent. And that basically means I represent artists to filmmakers and pitch their music on their behalf. So the sync agent is much like what we call a song plugger in Nashville. So I know about opportunities, I know what songs I have, and I'm pitching those songs for those opportunities. Each one of those obviously has pros and cons. So you just kind of have to think through what is the best way for you to do it as an artist. And you might do all three. You know, you might have one or two songs in a library, you might work with a sync agent, you might build relationships yourself because there's nothing that says you can't do more than one of those things. So that kind of gives you an idea of the different types of deals that you can do. Now, the question of exclusive and non-exclusive, that's more about the terms of the deal. And so those are phrases that you hear a lot. So exclusive means whoever you're signing it with, it's the song is only theirs to pitch. And so let's say I heard of a song need and I knew I had a song in an exclusive library. If I secure that placement, they still get money for it because it's an exclusive deal. So it's signed, and you're basically saying this is the agency representing the song. Now, non-exclusive deals means you can have something in multiple libraries. You can have something in a library, but you can also pitch it. So those are just deal terms that you'll need to get familiar with.
So much great information. What are some red flags that artists should look out for in deals that aren't good ones to be a part of?
Well, I think the first thing I would always say to an artist is we as artists, because I'm an artist as well, and that's actually how I started in sync is 12 years ago. I started doing my own sync pitching. And so a lot of this I've learned over the years by trial and error. But the first thing you need to do is really educate yourself. and that means starting to learn the terminology. I would also, if you have access to a lawyer or someone who you know is a lawyer, have them review a couple of the first contracts with you that you see to make sure you understand what you're signing. That's always important to know what you're signing and educate yourself. Um, there's a couple things that I would make sure, and I'm not giving legal advice here, but I would make sure I understood the terms of the deal. Is it exclusive? Is it non-exclusive? Is it, another term you'll see a lot is in perpetuity, which means forever, which most of the deals are that way. So if you place a song in a film or a TV show, basically they're saying, hey, we get to use this for the rest of time that this content exists, which makes sense because they wouldn't want to go back and have to replace music. One thing I always do make sure to look at is if there is a soundtrack or some type of a musical work released with the show or with the movie, you need to have something in the contract about issuing a separate license because that doesn't fall under the sync license. That falls under what you would call a mechanical license for TV and film. Um, that's basically when you produce a physical, either a download or a physical soundtrack. So I guess what I would just say is there's a lot you need to know, but I think you need to educate yourself and probably sit down with a lawyer or someone who's, legally aware of all these terms to make sure you understand what you're signing.
Fantastic. So I want to shift gears a little and talk about another side of being placed in a TV show or film or commercial or something. When the artist's song is in one of those, they're kind of associated with it and their brand is tied to it. And there are some situations where the artist could be in a show or a commercial of something that they personally stand for and is tied to their brand. So, what are some things that you would like to share about this where the artist and their brand is actually tied to the project that their song is being used for?
This is a really great question. So thank you so much for asking it. I think it's something that it's not, I actually just had this come up over the weekend with a film that I was working on. The situation is that when you sign your song over to someone else to pitch it, that means a sync agent or a library or some other third party. The reality is you lose creative control and decision making ability on where it gets placed. The benefit though is that you don't have those contacts for placements. So you're giving up some of that control you might have over where it gets placed for the opportunity for it to get placed someplace. And I'll give you a perfect personal example of this. So I have a song that's in a library, and um, it's a non-exclusive library, so I also pitch it. But this particular library had it placed in a news program. Well, in the US in particular, news programs are often really politically aligned with either Republicans or Democrats. No one from the library called me and said, "Okay, Shantell, this we're thinking about placing this song that you wrote on this station. Do you agree with the politics behind what this station is aligned with?" No. The library is there. The music, the person who needs the music found it in the library. They plugged it in, and I got a check. Now, what I do tell my clients on the sync side is you can say, look, there are certain things that I do not want my music considered for. For example, an adult film. You can give some broad guidelines like that, and for me personally that's easy because I don't work with adult films, so my clients never have stuff pitched to those type of projects. But in terms of like, do you personally agree with what the movie is, the message of the movie? Do you agree with the politics of the movie? Do you agree with the position of the scene that it's used in? Do you agree with what the characters are doing? You don't have any say in that, and it's not logical because you're combining your work with somebody else's creative work. So you have to just think that through. And, one of the best things is just to understand what types of projects, movies, TV shows, what types of projects are the people that you're working with working on in general. So that would give you a better sense of what type of projects your songs will show up in. I just had this happen actually over the weekend, ironically, with an artist who we had to make an edit to remove a profanity from one of her songs because it was for a family friendly Christian movie. And she said, "Well, I don't want this placement if it's any kind of a message about, X subject." And I said, "Well, it's not about X subject, but the contract you've signed with me allows me the right legally to pitch your song for whatever I want to pitch it for." So I went through the same explanation with her, but the long story short is if you want 100% control over what your brand is aligned to, you need to be the one pitching it yourself. The downside is if you don't have those relationships, you'll never get it placed anywhere. The other thing is you can also get a placement and not promote it. Not say like, "Hey, my song's in this movie." You can just collect the money and not associate your brand with it. So there's a third option there as well.
This is so interesting because I feel like it's so interesting learning about how all the different paths that you've touched on, there's pros and cons to everything. And I think like with the music industry in general and other creative industries too, like I'm currently seeking an agent for a novel I wrote in school, and that's a similar thing where like if you get an agent for that, they're the ones who are trying to get your book published and pitching to editors and things, and it's not really in your control anymore. And so, but then again, they're the ones with the connections. You can't get to big publishers without an agent. And so it's a similar thing where here, like, there are ways, like you're saying, of pitching yourself, but for certain things, maybe people go through agents and maybe people go through music libraries. So if you don't have your songs in those places and don't have somebody who can give you the relationships, then you're not going to really make great success unless you get lucky on your own. So it's so interesting hearing about the different ways.
Well, and I think you made a really good point, which I forgot to make earlier, which is the opportunities for placements aren't going to, in general, come to artists directly because filmmakers, content makers, they don't want the risk and they don't want the hassle of dealing directly with an artist that doesn't know how to do contracts, that doesn't know what the terms are. They don't want to, they don't have the time or the patience or the willingness to take on a risk. That's why they use third party companies because they're relying on people like me to get the contract signed basically that says everybody that wrote the song and published the song is okay with me pitching it. So that as a terminology that's called clearing the song. But if I'm CBS and I'm looking for content, for a TV show on my station, I'm not going to go talk to artists Sally Mae directly, um, to get her songs, because Sally Mae is hard to get a hold of, and maybe she doesn't want to license that song, and maybe she doesn't have the permission to license that song, and it just gets more and more complicated. And music is something that happens very quickly at the end of a project, and because of that, they don't want the hassle of working with individuals, which is why they use people like me and music libraries, because they can come to us and they can say, "This is what I need," and we deliver it to them. They don't have to go talk to artists, they don't have to go deal with licensing. We deliver them the songs pre cleared. So they're ready to place. That's all they have to do is put it in the scene.
Perfect. Love it. So, the last big thing I want to talk about is the songs themselves. So, writing a song that is good or suitable for TV and film may be different than writing something for a solo artist's career. What are things that filmmakers and music supervisors search for in songs that makes them realize that they may be good for placements?
So that's another great question around what type of songs get placed. Um, I would say in general, you need a song that does not have any kind of a storyline. The reason is, if you have a song that says, I went down on the corner and I played my guitar and it was winter and I had on gloves. What if the scene on the movie that they're looking to place a song in is in the summer, and the person's not playing an instrument and they're walking down a busy street? Or maybe they're sitting in a restaurant, they're not even on a street. So you don't want a storyline in your song to compete with what's happening on the screen. So the songwriting needs to be general, but that doesn't mean it can't have details in it. So I'll give you an example of a Christmas song that I wrote that will illustrate this point of not having a storyline, but still having some details. There's a song I wrote called Countdown to Christmas, and the chorus is, it talks about, from 8 to 80, we're all just kids. We can't wait for the 25th. It's time now for the countdown to Christmas. And the verses talk about, roll out the tinsel, hang up that mistletoe. Whoa, it's time to start the show, right? So these are all Christmas images, but it's not a specific storyline. So that song has been used in opening credits for films, it's been used in closing credits for films, it's been used in a montage. There's a lot of different ways that a song like that can be used. So you want it to be interesting and include some visual details, but you don't want a specific storyline. So it's finding the creativity inside of that sandbox.
That's perfect. Are there any themes that you typically see in songs that get placed?
There are some typical themes. One theme that you see a lot is being in love. That's a theme you see, finding the right person for you in your life, so finding your true love. You see themes that are about going home, themes that are about female empowerment, specifically in recent years. That's become a big one. And for most of the music that's used, not all, but for most of it, you'll hear mostly like um, pop music, anything from more organic sounding pop music, like a Colby Calais, to really heavily produced pop music, like, say, The Killers or something like that, or rock pop music. So it's a pretty broad range of what music gets used. But one thing I would say as a tip for people is watch shows, listen to the music instead of watching the scene. try to think about, okay, like, why did they use that particular song in this scene? What qualities does that song have? How is it emotionally supporting this story? And, if you write, let's say you have a lot of um, kind of ballads, and they tend to be sort of dark in the way they sound. Find TV shows that or films that are using that kind of music. That's one of the best ways you can sort of start aligning the sounds you're creating as an artist to the opportunities that are out there. And then the other thing is, you just write, like myself, my music that I do as an artist is Americana country, and at the same time, for film and TV, I mostly always write pop music because that's what gets placed. So I just shift what hat I'm wearing, but that's up to each artist how they want to approach that.
Awesome. So much great advice. Thank you so much. Are there any final thoughts you would like to share to any artists who may be considering going down the sync route?
So, if they've listened to this podcast, what I would invite them to do as something special that I don't typically offer to people, I have a group on Facebook called So Sync, SOSYNC, Artists Community Pitches for Artists. And if they will go to that group on Facebook and join it and answer the questions there and refer to the podcast, I'll allow them to come into that private exclusive group. And when I have opportunities, so when I have films that I'm working for, I will post a brief in that Facebook group. And if they have something that fits with the brief, and only if they have something that fits with the brief, they can message me and have me consider their songs for film and TV. So, in that way, I'd love to help your listeners get a foot in the door with a contact in the sync world.
Fabulous. Well, Chantel, that's perfect. Well, it was absolutely lovely having you on the show. Where can you share with everyone where they can find you online if you're on social media and give your website again just one more time?
Sure. So for sync, it's SO-SYNC.com. And it explains how I look for music, kind of how I work with artists, the projects that I've been involved in. And then for my own music, it's just my first and last name, Shantell Ogden, SHANTELLOGDEN.com. And I'm on every social platform. I even post sync tips on, I do post them in my Facebook group, but I also post them on TikTok. So if you want more tips like this, some short tips on how to get your music in film and TV, they can follow me on TikTok.
Perfect. Well, Chantel, it was an absolute honor having you on the show. Listeners, thank you so much for listening, and be sure to check out her Facebook group if you're interested in going down the sync path. And of course, until next time, stay
Stay
right on
right on
track.
track.